Bitcoin getting crushed again. It is now off 16% since hitting all-time highs earlier this month.
But the bank also pointed to tens of billions of pounds in extra savings by households who have not been able to spend, but at some point could be unleashed. Another much-needed shot in the arm.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Focus on Finance. In this new series of programs, we will be taking a closer look at the wonderful world of finance. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the various economic systems in the world. We'll be taking a look at socialism, a closer look at capitalism, and the Islamic economic system. We'll be hearing from the general public about what they understand to be socialism and capitalism, and hearing from our expert in London, Danyal Arif Sahib, on the expert view of what is socialism, capitalism, and the Islamic system. I'm joined in the studio again today by Murabi Shameem Jamal Ahmed, missionary based in Mauritius, and Niazi Hoolash, accountant by profession. Assalamu alaikum, gentlemen.
Wa alaikum salam.
As I said, we asked the general public what they understood to be socialism, capitalism, and maybe the Islamic system. Let's hear what they had to say.
Non, non m'entendez comme ça. Mais c'est moi, ça m'amène casse la tête avec ça parce qu'il n'est pas trop intéressant.
Non, ça lui m'a pas trop permis là-dedans. Moi, je ne pas trop rentrer en détail là-dedans. Il faut avec vous parce que je n'ai pas de réponse pour ça.
Oh, non, je ne suis pas trop familier avec ça, mais quand même, pour content qui tout le monde gagne pas. Tout le monde réussit dans la vie.
Capitaliste, c'est que tout le monde gagne capitaliste. Capitaliste, c'est quoi un argent plus. Mais tout le monde peut travailler pour survivre. Mais pour la vie, c'est bien difficile.
Oui, un peu, vaguement. Le capitalisme, c'est comme si les gens, qui contrôlent un peu, les capitalistes, enfin, contrôlent un peu le monde des finances, allons dire.
Politique, gouvernement, démocratie, entre autres.
Alors, un système capitaliste, ce fonctionnement, c'est que le capital investit dans une structure qui peut transformer une matière première en un produit qui peut avoir une valeur ajoutée. Le système capitaliste, il fonctionne normalement d'après un système que le capital investi permet qu'il y ait une plus-value qui est générée par le travail qu'accomplit sa matière première là, quel qu'il était. Il est capable d'un produit, il est capable d'un service, mais ce qui est important, c'est que le capital investi permet qu'il gagne une valeur additionnelle au produit qui bénéficie de sa capital là.
So, not surprisingly, there seems to be a lack of understanding and knowledge of what these systems are. I think before I come to the panelists, let's hear what the expert had to say. Earlier, I asked Arif Sahib in London to explain to us what the economic systems are, including the Islamic system. Let's hear from him.
Well, from strictly an economic point of view, we experienced two economic systems in the past. The first one is capitalism, which is an economic system where individuals or private entities own what we call the factors of productions, which is the capital goods, natural resources, labor, etc. And their primary objective is the profit for its own sake. So it is, first of all, an individualistic system because capitalism visualizes an absolute right to private ownership, and it encourages excessive accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few. But it is also a materialistic system because the capitalist economic order places a very high value to material aspect of human well-being. And on the other hand, we had socialism. Under socialism, all wealth and all means of wealth must be nationalized, which essentially means that individual property should become collective possession. wealth is, produced under collective organization, out of collective resources, and it should be distributed under collective supervision among individuals according to the needs, and all are to work according to the powers, but distribution must depend upon the needs of the individual. So it is irrespective of the amount of labor.
I also asked him earlier why the Islamic system fitted in with the capitalist and communist socialist systems. Let's hear his answer.
Well, I would say it depends from which angle you look at capitalism and socialism in the first place. If you look at them as economic systems only, Islam embodies the good points and attitudes of both, while discarding the evils. For instance, Islam permits capital accumulation and private enterprise, as does capitalism. But Islam also mandates wealth redistributions, as does socialism. So drawing an arbitrary line and saying that Islam is like capitalism or more like socialism is a false division, I would say. So Islam holds similarities to both in its external form, but it's distinct from both in its fundamental premise. Because if you look at them as a way of life, which I think they are, Islam is neither capitalist nor socialist, because the entire being of capitalism and socialism is based on a materialistic philosophy. It stifles the spiritual side of man. So it is quite obvious for socialism, as historically its expression has taken the form of atheism. But for capitalism, the basis is that the individual owner is the absolute owner of his wealth, and as such, he is accountable to no one. So the Islamic viewpoint, which forms the root of all Islamic economic principles, is that God is the absolute proprietor of one's wealth. And so one's wealth is merely a trust rather than one's own property, and its trust must be discharged back to society.
So we've heard the expert opinion of what is the capitalism, socialism, and what the Islamic system, how it fits in, and how it has elements of both. But perhaps let's start and explore each one at a time, and perhaps start with socialism before we come to capitalism and we go into a bit more detail about the Islamic system. So starting with socialism, Niazi Sahib, can you explain to us a little bit where it started and what the main principles of socialism are?
Yeah, I think building on what Arif Sahib said, Arif Sahib talked about the main tenets of socialism around basically it's the state which is controlling everything and they are providing for the people. I think it started, if you look at history, the predecessor to socialism was actually communism. Mm-hmm. And if you go back in history, not too long ago, let's say a few centuries ago, it is common knowledge for everyone that the main prevalent political system for control of countries were kingdoms. Mm-hmm. That was very prevalent. And we saw that there was the French Revolution, and even after the Industrial Revolution in Britain, etc., we found that increasingly people realized that the system of kingdoms meant that kings actually controlled every aspect of life, economic, social, of their countries, and obviously people were demotivated by that. And this is when we saw the fall of kingdoms. And today we do have kingdoms around the world, but very few where the executive power is held by the kingdoms. Mm-hmm. It's more like in the UK, they've got limited powers. In Saudi Arabia, they've got more powers. But by and large, like the King of Sweden or Spain, they're just honorific roles. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, the people, there was an uprising across the world with those revolutions, the most famous being the French Revolution, where people said they would take back power. And this is how communism found the light of the day, that the people collectively would own. Now, in reality, it might sound very lofty and great, that every people have got a say. But in practice, how do you lead? Mm-hmm. How do you reward effort? How do you reward those who make more effort compared to those who don't pull in their weight. Does this not stifle innovation? So effectively, after a while, and the most biggest proponent of communism is famously known to be Karl Marx. Although if you look into detail, it's not pure communism. We found that eventually it morphed into socialism. So socialism found its roots into communism, but let's say it's like a communism version 2.0, whereby the state still had a main role. Okay, but the state today, in the modern forms of socialism, the state provides for those who need the most. So the characteristics of a socialist government or socialist society, socialism is, there is private initiative, there's right to private property, as opposed to in the communism. However, okay, there is strong government intervention into providing for the needy, into helping redistribute incomes. And if you look at countries today, what we call socialist countries, examples are France, okay, can be considered a socialist country, high level of taxes, high level of social benefits. Same for the countries like Finland, Sweden, etc. And you find that it's not pure socialism, but there's an important degree of socialism. So in essence, when I look at where socialism came from, it came from really the depravities of kingdoms, the shortcomings of communism, and people evolve, and today we have socialism.
Yeah, I think the students of history it's a long, history is very long, but there are various avenues, and I think socialism and communism developed in different forms in different parts of the world. But in a nutshell, what is socialism? Is it characterized by the state owning the means of production, as they say?
Mostly the state owning a means of production. Well, there's a theory. The theory is about the state owning most of the factors of production. But in reality today, if you look at socialism, it's not the socialism as when the theory was being developed in economics. It has changed today. The reality today is, yes, there's a lot of government intervention, but there's still private enterprise, but with a lot of government intervention. And typically, if you look at China, for instance, is China a capitalist country or is it a socialist country? In fact, okay, we call state capitalism. Now, is state capitalism, could it be conflated with socialism in a certain way? The debate is on. I think it's a fantastic subject, but I would say, yeah, I think we can agree on a definition where we say that it is a system whereby there's a lot of government intervention into the economic activities of a country. Exactly.
And if we go back, so we started, as you said, in the olden times with the feudal and the monarchies. But if we fast forward to the 20th century, I find it interesting that the French Revolution was earlier, but with the Russian Revolution, this is where most people would say communism with Lenin and Stalin after him started. I'm reminded of the writings of the Muslim Maud, who wrote and predicted the outcome. He spoke on communism, wrote on communism. I wonder if Shameem Saib can enlighten us a bit of what he said and what was the outcome.
Well, quite wonderfully, Niazi Saib just mentioned how today states who claim to be communist states, so unknowingly they again drifted towards principles that are quite similar to Islamic principles. So we talk about the state, state intervention, then the need for also private enterprise. So then we find that balance which Islam has presented and which the second caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Muslim Maud, he explained very beautifully in his book, the economic system in Islam, where he made that comparison. And Hazrat Muslim Maud, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he highlighted the good aspects, some of the good aspects of communism and today you can say socialism, where the main focal point was, yes, Islam agrees on the fact that the state has to provide for the population. Everyone must be properly fed, properly clothed, properly housed, and everyone has, they have to have access to education and health. So all the basic needs, of the people should be fulfilled. So on this particular point, Islam is fully in accord with communism or socialism. That each and every individual in the society, his or her basic needs should be provided, and the state is responsible for that. In the Holy Quran, this is very clearly mentioned. It's among the first instructions that Allah gave to Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. We're talking about the 20th century, and Marx and Stalin. Adam alayhi salam, according to the historians, appeared 7,000 years ago. That the Holy Quran instructed the Prophet of the time that make sure that they don't walk hungry, they don't walk naked, and they are not left exposed to the sun. So the basic needs, the house, food, and clothes at that time. So yes, this is the positive aspects that Islam highlights, and this have been mentioned in the Holy Quran and in the ahadith, the sayings of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam 14, 15 centuries ago, and Hazrat Muslim Maud highlighted those aspects. This said, there's a place where he drew the line. The need for, personal enterprise, the need to recognize personal efforts. Islam, the Holy Quran, Allah Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran that I've created man with various capacities. So Islam recognizes the fact that men have been given various abilities and various capacities to work. Some do more and some do less. That is why the Holy Quran said, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, that vie with each other in goodness. So Holy Quran recognizes the fact that I can make more effort or I can make less effort, and Niazi said can make more effort. And Allah Ta'ala, He recognizes this. Yes, maybe X made more effort than Y. So in any given economic system, this should be catered for. And this is why in beginning communism, this was completely overlooked. That there was no room for that to reward this personal enterprise. And this is what it stifled innovation and everything. And this is why naturally drifted towards, socialism, like Niazi said, mentioned the need for those things. So, like our expert Danyal said, mentioned, so Islam says that yes, there are a few aspects in communism and socialism which are espoused by the Holy Quran, but also Islam leaves the door open for individual enterprise and due development of individual capabilities, whereas communism, unfortunately, as history shows us that communism shuts that door completely.
And I think history also shows us that communism didn't last. I mean, I think if we look around the political arena today in 2021, we see North Korea, we see a version of communism or socialism in China, but they're not the same as the classical things. But most historians would point to the collapse of the USSR as was, and now there's just Russia, which is pretty much a capitalist country. Do you see that as a lot of people may view that as the defeat of socialism and communism, and therefore the victory of capitalism? So I think it brings us quite nicely to what is capitalism. We heard Danyal Saib explain from a technical perspective what is capitalism. Is there anything you would like to expand on that?
Well, just to reiterate what he said, capitalism is characterized by free enterprise, by the pursuit of profits for its own sake, individual initiative. There's the famous economist Adam Smith who talks about the invisible hand that somehow forces of demand and supply will create the right equilibrium. And in the forces of demand and supply, in that equilibrium, the system will work properly. The issue we have, and if we look at today, the USA is coined as a capitalist country. And I think largely speaking, it is probably the most capitalist country in the world. Now, when we look at that, is it a victory of capitalism over socialism? I think to a large extent, if we look at today's world, it is a debate on semantics. If we forget the terminologies, for an instance, what is it we see? In the US, for instance, definitely it is when you talk about the promise, okay, of getting to the USA, that anything can be possible. Previous President Barack Obama spoke extensively about what he achieved could only have been achieved in a country like the US.
The American dream.
The American dream, exactly. So, in fact, to a large extent, if we talk about the American dream or the good side of it, it is the concept that if you are making your effort and you do what needs to be done, there is no other external forces like nepotism, etc., and whatever that is going to prevent you from realizing your potential. And I must say, to a large extent, that is true. That has been true in comparison. However, it is this same system, okay, which then, if you look at a country like the US, which is the most powerful economy in the world, there are many people going hungry. If you look at the US, which is the most powerful economy in the world, that's the country in the world where insulin costs the most, is the most expensive. And why? It's because Big Pharma have been given a free hand in the name of free enterprise, and millions of people are not able to get their medication, health, which is a basic need, to be able to, and they die. We talk about the Affordable Healthcare Act in the US, for instance, but that is an act which is very socialist in its approach. This is where the government has done a deal with the private sector, and they contribute to that universal healthcare system, that insurance, whereby people can have an affordable healthcare. You are from the insurance sector yourself, and you would know, in many of the insurance contracts of health insurance, one of the main exclusion clauses you see across the world is it covers all countries except the US. And probably one of the reasons is because of this is so expensive in the US that insurance companies would hesitate before covering it. Go to some other country in the world. So, to come to what the capital system is, I think you can talk of a victory of capitalism at a certain moment in time, because the limitations of socialism, in terms of communism rather, was stifling innovation, and there was the geopolitics at play as well, because the US had to be against USSR. It was a competition around global power. So this is where communism was broken. There was not enough room for individual initiative. Capitalism came, but now with the shortcomings of capitalism, what we see increasingly countries are introducing ways to protect the needy. In the COVID crisis that we just saw, the government has been actually handing out checks to people. But if this is not communism or socialism, what is it? Right? So the reality is, in the most capitalist country in the world, who prides itself on free enterprise, is finding itself obligated to implement systems that reeks of socialism or even communism. Food stamps, for instance. That is communism. So what is our conclusion when we look at that? What we find is any extreme system is bad. What is right going forward and what is sustainable going forward is the middle line.
And this brings us back to what Islam teaches, isn't it?
Exactly. You see that if you study what happened to communism and modern socialism today, that looking for that middle way, the same thing happened with capitalism. So in the beginning, with communism, no, everything should be the state, the state, the state. And they saw, no, this is not sustainable. We should have personal enterprise, coming close to the Islamic principles. And we see the same phenomenon going on with capitalism. Yes, no, the individual has right, the state should not interfere, and so on and so forth. But slowly, they see the need that, no, there should be some kind of control. Because in the beginning of what Niazi said, it was claimed that when we leave everything to go freely, supply and demand, there will be equilibrium. But today there is no equilibrium. So this is what Islam says. Islam teaches us that justice is the way ahead. If there is no justice, then there will not be peace. So to add on, again, Islam does not condemn capitalism as wrong. There are many things which Islam encourages, some aspects of capitalism that Islam encourages. If you talk about, the American dream, yes, everyone, the Holy Quran states that everyone should earn for what he strives for. The verse of the Holy Quran. So this is a basic, principle of capitalism. You do effort, you should see it. So there are principles in capitalism that Islam supports. Yes, personal enterprise, the room for voluntary effort, which is very important in Islam, which cannot be achieved in, let's say, rigid communism, that everything which is surplus should go to the state. But that's not the case with capitalism, and this is very important for Islam. We've talked about the importance of serving the poor and the destitute. So this can be possible only if there is that surplus of wealth, and you use that to serve the creation. This is something which would not have been possible in a purely communist society. So coming back to the Islamic approach, Niazi mentioned the middle way. The middle way is the Islamic way. Absolutely. That's our conclusion. Islam, well, it came before communism and capitalism, but Islam presented principles of the economy that espouse both some aspects of communism and some aspects of capitalism. Yes, that if we talk about the cons of capitalism from an Islamic perspective, the number one is that growing gap between the wealthy and the poor. Islam, from the very beginning, with the abolition of interest and the institution of zakat, which is a tax on the wealth, and thirdly on the laws concerning inheritance, it cuts down the possibility of a few individuals accumulating an indecent amount of money, let's say. Yep. So this is where Islam, does not, agree with capitalism, and also, like our expert mentioned it, both of them, be it communism and be it capitalism or socialism for that matter, they have, main purpose is money, to acquire wealth, which is not what Islam presents. Islam presents wealth and money, as we mentioned in our previous episode, as the means to attain something else. So, just in a nutshell, to conclude, Islam does not condemn fully capitalism, does not condemn fully communism, but Islam presents the middle way. And inshallah, going ahead, when we'll be discussing about interest in detail, about the law of inheritance, about zakat, about khums, which is a tax on minerals, there we'll find out how, yes, this is the middle way, the right balance between the state intervention and individual freedom.
And that is a fascinating aspect. But capitalism, socialism, I think we've touched on what they are. The Islamic system is, unsurprisingly, the best of both, if you like. But I look at it in a different way. Perhaps they have taken the good bits from it.
Yep.
And it remains to be seen how capitalism expands. So in future programs, we'll be looking at zakat and interest and how the Islamic system works. And we'll be taking a closer look at money, the banking system, and we can touch a bit about this confidence and so on. So that concludes today's program. So Jazakallah to my panelists, Niazi Sahib, Shameem Jamal Ahmed Sahib, Jazakallah. And once again, a thank you to Danyal Arif Sahib for his insights. And we hope you can join us again for the next episode of Focus on Finance. Assalamu alaikum.